Namaste. Welcome to the 12th monthly online guest lecture organized by the research scholars at the School of Sanskrit, Philosophy and Indic Studies, Goa University. Thank you all for being here. Today's lecture is titled Revisiting the Concept of Consciousness in Indian Philosophies. Our distinguished guest and speaker today is Professor Madhusudan Penna. Just a couple of reminders before we start. This event is being recorded. The participants are requested to please make sure that your microphone is on mute during the lecture. The lecture will go on for about 60 minutes, and at the end of it, there will be a Q&A session. If you have any queries or concerns, please feel free to type them out in the chat box, and we will get back to you. Please remember that the messages in the chat box are also being recorded. May I now invite Ms. Sia to kindly deliver the welcome address.
Am I audible?
Yes, you are.
Yes.
A very good afternoon to one and all. It's an honor to have amongst us Dr. Madhusudan Penna. Dr. Penna is the Vice Chancellor and Professor and Dean of the Faculty of Indian Religion, Philosophy and Culture, Kavi Kulguru Kalidas Sanskrit University, Ramtek, Maharashtra. He specializes in Yoga Shastra, Nyaya, Yoga and Vedanta philosophy. He was awarded the Sahitya Academy Award in 2019 for his Mahakavya on Gulab Rao Maharaj. He has 2 Mahakavyas, 10 Laghu Kavyas and 30 translations and edited books to his credit. Dr. Penna is honored with honorary D.Litt by National Sanskrit University, Tirupati for his unique contribution to Indian philosophy. He has travelled to the Netherlands and was a member of the Indian delegation to Canada in the World Sanskrit Conference 2018. He knows 6 languages, including German, and has made DVDs on yoga, Indian philosophy, and Sanskrit literature. The Tirumala Peetham, established by Bhagavad Ramanujacharya in the 10th century, conferred Shastra Ratnakar on him. He has received Maharashtra Government Sadhana Award, Pandit Satwalekar Memorial Award, Pandit Latkar Shastri Memorial Award, Pandit Ghatte Memorial Award, Somnath Trust Award with a gold medal and a title of the best scholar, Shri Bhashyam National Award, and many others. On behalf of the School of Sanskrit, Philosophy and Indic Studies, I welcome you, sir. I would also like to welcome Dr. Koshi Tarakan, Dean of SSPIS, all other faculty members, Professor Sanjot, Dr. Norma, Dr. Walter, and Ms. Rajvi. I welcome all the research scholars at Goa University. I also welcome all participants, faculty, students from and outside Goa University. Thank you so much. Over to you, Vidya.
Thank you, Sia. May I now invite Professor Koshi Tarakan, Dean of the School of Sanskrit, Philosophy and Indic Studies, to kindly say a few words.
Thank you, Vidya. As Ms. Sia already said, today we have with us a very distinguished scholar, academic, an accomplished writer, a celebrated poet, a recipient of Sahitya Academy. So, today we are really honored with his presence, and I'm sure all of us would be really enjoying his erudite lecture on revisiting the concept of consciousness in Indian philosophies. Professor Penna, as you have seen, has worked in the areas of yoga, Shastra, Ṛgveda, Vedanta, and various classical Indian texts. He also, apart from his philosophical writings, is also a creative writer, as you could see from the bio note that was circulated. So I extend a warm welcome to you, sir, on behalf of Goa University, School of Sanskrit, Philosophy and Indic Studies, and on behalf of all of us who are assembled here. And just to brief you about this series of talks that our research scholars are conducting regularly, almost every month we have a distinguished speaker with us. Basically, we identify the speaker in relation to the research concerns of our research scholars. So our scholars are working on various philosophical problems, ranging from the problem of consciousness, as can be seen from the talk scheduled today, to issues on pedagogy, issues on the notion of self and the other, the public sphere, technology and authenticity, transcendence and immanence, so many other philosophical concepts to come into our research program. So many a time when we invite, speakers from outside Goa, our research scholars, they take care of this particular aspect. So today we are really eagerly awaiting your lecture. And with these words, let me once again welcome you, and back to you, Vidya.
Thank you, Professor. May I now invite our guest speaker of the day, Professor Madhusudan Penna, to kindly deliver his lecture. Over to you, sir.
Yeah, how to share, ma'am? There is one present now option.
Yes, sir.
And when I click, there are three options: your entire screen, a window, tab. So entire screen, if I share, so are you able to see this screen, ma'am?
Yes, we can see your PPT.
Yeah, thank you all. So good afternoon. I really am excited because this is one of the most interesting topics of this Indian philosophy, and you're all interested in knowing about the basics of Indian philosophy, especially in the background of this concept of consciousness. Of course, this has interested many scientists and philosophers alike. At the outset, I thank the organizers, the Department of Philosophical Studies and Sanskrit. So, in this towards evening, we will be really revisiting many systems of Indian philosophies and their understanding of the concept of consciousness, and how differences had arisen, and how many attempts were made to reconcile with the concept of consciousness. So that will be the core subject matter of today's lecture. As you know, that right from the time of Vedic literature, we find ample thought given to the concept of consciousness. Because in the Samhita, Brahmana, Aranyaka, Upanishad, if we go through all the most ancient texts, we find that it's actually this baffled and inspired many thinkers. So many wanted to know that the basic reason of this, the basic source of this, the purpose of this. So the three things are related to consciousness: the source, purpose, and the base. So when we go through the Upanishadic literature, we find a clearer exposition of this concept of consciousness. You find in the Kenopanishad, for example, this Upanishad begins with the sentence Keneshitam patati preshitam manaha. So this itself is very clear here that Kena, they wanted to know the source behind all the sense activities. So what makes it? What makes my senses to function? What makes my speech to manifest? So this was the basic question. That means they wanted to know that when all these faculties are happening in the body, what is the source? And the second question was, what is the base? That means, where is this consciousness situated? Is it in the brain or mind or heart? So that thought was also there. And thirdly, it was the purpose that interested the thinkers. Purpose. That means, if at all there is some consciousness, is it universal or individual? Then, if it is one single consciousness, then how come that manifests itself in different forms? If it is different, then is this difference permanent, eternal, or non-eternal? So we find such deliberations in the Kenopanishad, Kathopanishad. Of course, you find the Kathopanishad giving importance to the life after death, and all the other things they revolve around this concept. What happens to a soul after leaving the body? That means it is taken for granted there that there is some reality even after death. So, one Abhyupagama Siddhanta in Nyaya Shastra, we say that considering something as true for some time, we actually proceed with our deliberation, argument, discussion. Such thing can be found in the Kathopanishad. Then Mundaka and Mandukya. If we go through these two Upanishads, we find that the Mundaka Upanishad is basically meant for the mendicants, or you can say the hermits. So the sannyasi, Mundaka, and the nature of self, the purpose of it, the functions, everything is there. But when you come to Mandukya Upanishad basically deals with the three syllables of Omkara equated with three states of human experience. Three states are the wakeful state, dream state, and deep sleep. So three states, and they were trying to analyze these three states of consciousness, whether there is one consciousness, whatever is there in the wakeful state. So what happens in the dream state, and what happens to all these experiences, the experiencer, the actually the base of experiences, what happens in the deep sleep state. So all these became very interesting, and naturally the ancient thinkers had discussed these matters and presented their understanding from the Annamaya, the subtlest are simply because these are the infrasentient consciousness. And the Taittiriya Upanishad tries to take us to the higher consciousness called Anandamaya. And there, about 12 levels of Ananda are explained, starting with the Manushananda to the Brahmananda. Various levels are discussed, and human efforts should be focused on attaining that Ananda, that is Brahmananda. And everything else in the Taittiriya Upanishad that deals with the same topic, consciousness, its final goal, and its various activities. Now coming to the Chandogya and Brihadaranyaka, intermittently we find some passages dealing with the state of consciousness, whether it is ultimate or is there something beyond consciousness, that is also discussed in the Chandogya and Brihadaranyaka. So if it is the absolute consciousness, that which doesn't have anything beyond it, then what is the final consciousness in its essential form? What is that? So these are all efforts made by our ancestors on this land to know life, consciousness, and its other auxiliary matters. So in this process, we find that nobody was out of this, because even our Charvaka, Bauddha, Jaina, Sankhya, Yoga, Nyaya, Vaiśeṣika contributed to this, though we find some logical lacunae, or you can say fallacies, in some of these arguments, their understanding. We all know that understanding something doesn't make it a theory. I may get an idea, but in order to convert my idea into a theory, I require some logical structure. And entire Nyaya Shastra is based on that. That's main purpose is to train the human brain in a particular logical structure. And that logical structure gives the essential strength to the idea, argument, then that can be accepted by others also as the final theory. So the Sankhya Yoga, Nyaya Vaiśeṣika, Purva Mīmamsa, Vedanta. In the Vedanta system itself, we have several like Shankara Advaita, Ramanuja, Madhva, Nimbarka, Achintya Bheda Bheda, Chaitanya. So all these are the various Vedanta systems. So when we try to understand this concept of consciousness, we generally start with the gross and try to get to the subtle so that we can understand the development of this discussion, development of a true philosophy. And here tattva jnana is of a lot of importance. Tattva in our philosophy is the reality or the essence. So when a particular thing or point or some matter of discussion is understood essentially, it is known as tattva jnana. And in all the systems of philosophy, tattva jnana is given a lot of importance because tattva jnanat mokshadhigamaha, nishreyasadhigamaha. So these are the part of sutras where you find that the tattva jnana is the only way to liberation, final liberation. So in the context of this final liberation, the concept of consciousness holds much importance. Without knowing consciousness, you cannot expect any liberation at all because there are so many questions connected to this concept. One thing is whether there is one consciousness or many, whether the consciousness has any liberation or not. If it doesn't have liberation, then who else has the liberation? Who is in bondage? And consciousness, is it characterized by ego? That ego principle and consciousness, are they one or different? Then what is the final goal of this consciousness? That if we believe in the cycle of birth and death, what will be the last birth or death or stage of this consciousness? So there are so many questions related to that. In this background, when we study the Western philosophy also, we find at many places that the Westerners didn't have the concept of consciousness apart from either the body or the mind. So sometimes they equate that with the mind, that with the body, that with the brain, or sometimes with the heart. So the consciousness is differently understood in Western philosophy because even Descartes also said that mind is consciousness. So according to him, the mind itself is the locus of consciousness, which is not acceptable in Indian philosophy. Therefore, in the background of this Western philosophy, it is now very pertinent to know and understand thoroughly this concept of consciousness. Namo Mantrapatiin. So in this background, I would like to offer our salutations to the Mantrapati. That means all the sacred souls, the great souls who had contributed to the development of this branch of philosophy. Maham Brahma Nirakuryam, Mama Brahma Nirakarot, Anirakaranamastu, Anirakaranam Mestu. Om. May that universal consciousness not leave me. May I not get away from the universal consciousness. May there be a perfect coordination between the universal consciousness and me, may we not reject each other. So this is the prayer. And after that, now in today's lecture, we will be discussing and trying to understand some of these very important points. One, what is consciousness according to all the systems? The place of consciousness. Second, plurality of consciousness. That means this is actually a matter of regular experience that the consciousness manifests itself in many bodies. So the plurality is very obvious. But regarding the plurality, what other systems say? So that is also a point to be discussed. Then functions. How does it function? The consciousness. Its expression. Why and how the consciousness tries to express itself. Another one. Mind and consciousness relation. This is another point that needs to be properly understood, whether mind is consciousness or different. If different, then what is consciousness? Then ultimate destination of consciousness. So if consciousness is just flowing like a river, does it have any ocean to merge with? Or what is the purpose of the manifestation of this consciousness through the bodies? Is it according to the will of some other supreme consciousness or the same consciousness? So all these have been discussed in the Vedanta system also. To some level, in the Yoga Shastra also these are discussed. And in the coming slides, we will be seeing these points one by one.
Excuse me, sir, your slides are not visible now. Could you please check?
Okay. Do you see that, man?
Not yet, sir. Yes, sir. Now it's visible. Thank you.
Yeah. So now we start with the Charvaka. We all know that Charvaka is the word in Sanskrit for the materialist or the materialism. Charvaka Darshana we say. And Sayanacharya also has given a place for this in the Sarvadarshana Sangraha. But of course, we don't have any single text on Charvaka as of now. But Charvaka principles and theories are found scattered here and there in Sanskrit texts like Jayanta Bhatta Nyayamanjari or Kautilya Arthashastra or other texts also. You find some of these sutra of Charvaka system are given as references. Apart from that, recently the Kerala Chinmaya International Foundation had published one book on Charvaka philosophy, that is Tatvopaplava Simha, and the long back Lokayata, that was published from Kolkata. So some books are there, some primary and secondary. But here in Charvaka system, we find that consciousness is a property of the body. It's not something other than the body. So therefore, they had given importance to the analysis of consciousness in relation with the body only. So therefore, we find their statement that Chaitanya Visishtam Shariram Atma. So they said, here we find the difference very clearly, that Chaitanya Visishtam Shariram Atma, that means the self is none other than the body, physical body, which is characterized by Chaitanya. Chaitanya is variously understood. Chaitanya can be activity, source of the activity. Chaitanya is generally the knowing, the faculty of knowing. So that is consciousness. And they say body with this consciousness is Atma. So Atma is a prime set which includes these two subsets like body and consciousness. So therefore, according to the Charvaka, mere consciousness being called as the soul is totally discarded. It is body with the consciousness. So therefore, the consciousness becomes a property of the body only, the physical property. And behind and beyond the material body, there is no soul. This is Charvaka understanding. Because they say that just on the basis of a hypothetical entity called self or consciousness, you forgetting this material world and always living in a dream world is not good. So Charvaka would like to give importance to this life, and they say this body is reality, consciousness in this body is reality, and apart from that you don't have any self, atma, etc. This is definitely uh, in contradiction with what the other systems of philosophy explain to us. So this is the understanding of Atma in the Charvaka philosophy. Then, how is this Chaitanya created in the body? In the Charvaka system, this Chaitanya is created. Again, we find that this particular statement goes against the view that is presented in the Upanishads. Because in almost all the Upanishads we find that the consciousness is eternal, without death, without decay, without any kind of modification. This is their understanding of consciousness. But when it comes to Charvaka, they say that there is consciousness, of course, but it is always related to the body only. Apart from the body, there is no consciousness. Therefore, there is no necessity of studying the Veda, living according to the Veda, performing Vedic rituals. All this is not required, they say, because all the Vedic rituals bear significance only when you believe in the existence of a soul. Only when you believe that there is some reality that exists even after one's death, and that particular one carries the result of the deeds. If we believe in that particular entity, then all the Vedic rituals and the religious practices bear significance. Charvaka say that there is no proof in that, there is no evidence in that. How can you say that after death there is something that is continuing and that is carrying all the good and bad? Since there is no evidence in that or solid proof in that, we don't believe. That is Charvaka's understanding. And mind you, when Charvakas say so, they have the direct perception as the valid means. That means unless you know something directly, you don't believe it. This is their scientific thought, a kind of rational thinking. And whatever consciousness is manifested in the body in the form of various activities, it is nothing but a kind of result of combination of the elements. So earth, fire, water, air. So these are the four elements according to the Charvaka. And these four elements, these actually cause the world. And the body is one of the world. Therefore, the body is also created by the four. Of course, in other systems of philosophy also they accept it. But the major difference is that in the other systems, the Pancha Mahabhuta are there, and the body is physical, definitely created by the five elements, okay. But when it comes to the consciousness, Charvaka says that consciousness is the body. Other systems say consciousness is in the body. That is the difference. When you say in the body, you have a kind of adhara adheya. That means a kind of substratum and an object or property belonging to that. When you say the consciousness is in the body, you are indirectly accepting a kind of difference. So that is the basic question. And Charvaka definitely says that there is no proof in accepting that the consciousness is other than the body and that subsists in the body. There is no proof in that. Therefore, the Chaitanya or all the activities in the body, including cognitive functions, they are all because of the consciousness only. But they are all a production, an effect of the amalgamation of four elements. So there is no need to believe that there is a soul even after death. And therefore they say, Vedaha Vedasya Kartaraha, Trayo Vedasya Kartaraha. So they say ultimately three people created the Veda, Bhanda Dhurta Nishacharaha, and they didn't have any idea. They didn't give proper thought to the philosophical thinking, etc., etc. So therefore, Charvaka does not believe in any other self or soul or Atma or Chaitanya apart from the body. So this is the grossest thinking, the general popular thinking. This is Charvaka. Now, when you ask the Charvaka, then, okay, if consciousness is the property of the body, then what is the purpose of that? See, Charvaka thinkers very clearly say that there is no purpose at all. All the purposes are limited to the world experience only, like happiness or sadness, glee or gloom, or you can say pain and pleasure. So the consciousness is experiencing that, that's all, and there is no other entity. So therefore the consciousness, if it gets sukha, it is swargaloka. If it gets dukkha, it is narakaloka. And death is a kind of full stop to this consciousness here only. So therefore, as the body is reduced to ashes, the consciousness also perishes. This is the grossest thinking in Indian philosophy. In other systems of philosophy, this has been put to a very rigorous criticism and simply discarded on the base that it lacks all logical strength. So this argument is just discarded. Now when we come to the next thinker, that is Bauddha thinker. See, in the texts of Buddhism also we find very profound discussions regarding the existence of Atma, Chaitanya, Chit Shakti, then all the worldly experiences and the seat of such experiences. So all these actually made a subject matter in the Buddhism also. When Lord Buddha was asked about the consciousness, so he simply said there are some 14 questions that cannot be answered or need not be answered. Such questions are very popular in Buddhism. Even on internet you can find it, that such questions are never answered by Lord Buddha. And his silence about those questions led to formation of various philosophical schools later, like Vijnanavada, Shunyavada, like Madhyamika, Yogachara, Sautrantika, Vaiśeṣika. So all these systems of philosophy, they came into existence as a result of philosophical silence of Lord Buddha also. So when it was asked in the Buddhism, why do you call it consciousness, Vijnana? Then the reply was given, because it cognizes, it is called consciousness. This is very important, that when consciousness is asked for its definition, they said cognition goes with consciousness. Vijnana. Beyond Vijnana, nothing is there. This is the Vijnanavadi Bauddha, popularly known as the Yogachara. because Madhyamika belonged to the Shunyavada, Yogachara are the Vijnanavadi. And Shantarakshita and other great thinkers were there. After Lord Buddha, many great thinkers they lived on this planet, and they contributed to the spread of Vijnanavada. And very typically, you know that Fahian and Yuanshan from China, he traveled for almost 4 years across all the deserts, all the forests, all that. And he came to India only to learn Vijnanavada Buddhism from an authentic teacher like Shantarakshita. So he was here, he studied Vijnanavada, and when the then king wanted to arrange a scholarly congregation, when all the scholars were invited there, and when Yonchen teacher asked all the pupils who would like to participate in the debate, then everybody was actually hesitating, and only Yonchen, he came forward and said, with your blessings, I present the Vijnanavada there in the congregation. That was the conviction they had, and Vijnanavada still continues. So this Vijnana is consciousness. Vijnana is cognition. And in the nihilist, or you can say the Shunyavada, they say Buddhists argue that nothing is constant. This is the Kshanikavada. Nothing is constant. That means you don't search for a permanent thing. Everything is undergoing some modification, transformation every moment. So everything is momentary. Kshanikavada. That means one moment is its creation, our cognition, and gone. So that moment itself, you cognize that it is there. Next moment, it is not there. And everything changes through time. You have a constantly changing stream of consciousness. According to the Buddhism, we find the Vijnana Skandha and Vijnana Pravaha. This is the stream of consciousness. The stream of consciousness is really a novel concept, that it is like the wave theory. One ripple is created, and that takes us to the next one, and third, fourth, fifth. So like that, a chain is created. So this is Vijnana Pravaha. And the Buddhists believe that a human being also is nothing but the stream of consciousness. And from a neuroscience perspective, the brain and body both are in a constant flux, constantly in a flux. There is nothing that corresponds to the sense that there is an unchanging self. So Buddhism does not believe in a permanent soul. And therefore, what does it say? It says very clearly, there is nothing that corresponds to the sense of an unchanging self. So if you say that there is one unchanging eternal self, so the Buddhism says it is actually the combination of several things. Self is not single. That can be isolated, that can be understood separately, independently. But they want to say that the skandhas are the self, and there is no other unchanging self. So Ivan Thompson, he had summarized the essence of Buddhism also. They believe that there is some form of consciousness that's not dependent. So dependent on the physical one. So this is Pratitya Samutpada. We find that according to the Pratitya Samutpada, everything is dependent. And in some other schools, because during the time of Lord Buddha itself, there were about 16 to 18 schools of Buddhism. And later we find that many other branches were created, like the Sautrantika, Madhyamika, Yogachara, and Vaiśeṣika. So some of them believe that there is, of course, some form of consciousness that's not dependent on the body. Now, we understand that this is a kind of development of Charvaka philosophy, that Charvaka were not prepared to accept any reality called self other than the body. So they maintained that consciousness is the property of the body. But some of the Buddhist thinkers believed that consciousness is not just body, it is other than that. But many still hold that ultimately this does not presuppose or lead to the theory that there is a self other than consciousness. So this is the Buddhist idea. And now we try to understand the Buddhist idea of consciousness. Can you please mute the, some disturbance is there? Hello?
Yes, sir. It's been muted.
Thank you. Yeah. So, can you see the screen? No.
We can see it now, sir. Yes.
Okay, man. So, in Buddhism, though Lord Buddha had not written any direct text on the Buddhism, we find that his followers, after 100 years or so, they assembled and they had worked on his discourses, and finally they had systematized all his teachings. According to this, there are Panchaskandha and Dwadasha Ayatana. But when it comes to the concept of consciousness, we find in the Buddhism that there are the five skandha. Skandha means generally a kind of conflicts, you can say, or congregation, group, or a kind of compound. So Rupa is one skandha, that is form, material image, or impression. Then we have the sensations, feelings. These are received from form. In modern physics also we find that the qualia, they are the reason why the senses are stimulated. So the external qualia, they actually stimulate the senses, and the senses carry the impression, and that is stored in the brain, that is cerebral cortex. So the sensations, the qualia, that is the Vedana skandha. Then we have clear perception, Saujña skandha. And here we know that major part of our human life, that is in the form of various perceptions. And the Buddhism notes that also. Then we have samskara. These are the mental activities or formations. So impressions generally. Impressions are that are carried to the brain through the senses, and they are stored in the brain according to the modern science. But the systems of Indian philosophy believe that these impressions are taken to the soul. Only Adi Shankaracharya says that the soul doesn't have any impression at all. But to all other thinkers, soul itself carries the impressions. So these are the mental activities. Then we have ultimately the Vijnana, which we had already talked about. That is consciousness. Vijnana Vada, Bauddha. This is the Vijnana Skandha, where we have all these cognitions. And cognition itself is consciousness according to the Buddhist thinkers. Thus, even in the Buddhism also we find that apart from the Panchaskandha, there is no need to believe in the presence of any other independent entity called self. Thus, they have limited themselves to the analysis of consciousness in relation with the material, physical, all these entities like Rupa, Vedana, Saujña, Samskara, Vijnana. So in relation with these only, they have tried to analyze the concept of consciousness. But coming to the Jaina perspective, we find that consciousness is a primary attribute of Jīva. Here you find a very dynamic uh, deviation from the routine thinking, that to the Charvaka and Bauddha, consciousness is there, but it is not a separate entity. But to the Jaina, it is a primary attribute of Jīva. So therefore, consciousness and Jīva, if you compare these two, the soul and its attribute consciousness. So this kind of understanding that emerged, and this consciousness manifests itself as darshana and jnana. This is one kind of analysis of the same thing, that the China thinkers had analyzed, that darshana, perception, and jnana, knowledge. Of course, the Buddhist thinkers also talked about these two, perception, samujna, and vijnana, that is cognition or knowledge. They also talked about that. But when it came to the Jaina thought, they said that consciousness manifests as darshana and jnana. So therefore you can understand that darshana, perception, jnana, knowing, these two are only the manifestation of the consciousness. So when you say manifestation, like the sunlight from the source called sun, you understand that this is manifestation and this is source of manifestation. Thus we have two here, the consciousness source and its manifestation in the form of darshana and jnana. Then in the Jaina system, consciousness is not limited only to the human species. They say earthly substances, water, air, fire, and the vegetation, all these have life. Whatever has life has consciousness. So therefore they believe that consciousness is a kind of indicatory mark of life. No consciousness, no life. Therefore the Vedanta says life is consciousness. But all others say that life is characterized by consciousness, and thus they try to make a kind of distinction between the two. But that consciousness is present in all the earthly substances, in water, air, fire. Very typically, in water also there is consciousness, in air, fire, vegetation. But if you ask the same question, the Vedantins may reply differently, saying that if consciousness is there in all these, then what is consciousness basically? If you say darshana and jnana, so do you say that water, air, fire, and vegetation, they also have their own perception and knowledge? For this, the Jaina thinkers reply that the water, air, fire, and vegetation, all these have life, all these have consciousness, they also have perception, they also have knowledge, but limited. So ekendriya, dvindriya, trindriya, like that, the grade of consciousness is there. And they say, of course, this thought is found in the Skanda Purana also. In the Puranic lore also you find some explanation regarding the seat of consciousness. And they say trees also have consciousness. They say, like the trees have some senses, they don't have eyes, but other senses are there, they say. So thus shvasanti padapaha, they say the trees also breathe, and therefore there is life. And all types of living beings can be divided into 6 categories. This is according to the Jaina system of philosophy. That is Prithvikaya, Apahakaya, Vayukaya, Agnikaya, then plant kingdom, and that cannot move, they are also there. Basically 4 plus 2, 6. So these are the Kaya. Kaya means actually a body, a group of some elements, that is Kaya. So these are the Kaya, 6 categories. And now in Jainism, when we try to understand the Jainism in the background of the stages of consciousness or final destination of consciousness, we find that the Jaina thinkers have analyzed this, and they started from the mithyatva to ayogi kevali. There are about 14. You find here that mithyatva is the lowest level of consciousness, and the highest stage is ayogi kevali, and everything else is in between these two. The mithyatva, in some people you find this kind of consciousness that their worldview is totally deluded. They are non-believer in existence of soul. Then if you ask the Jaina, do you believe in the existence of soul? They say yes, as something that has consciousness for its attribute, that is soul according to us. So a person who does not believe in this, a common man, totally dull-witted, he is the mithyatva, totally deluded. But just above, we have lingering, enlightened worldview, but you find here it's not totally enlightened one, because there are several levels. In the third level, we find mixture of both deluded and enlightened. So this particular soul will be oscillating between 2 points, that on one side enlightenment, on the other side all worldly attractions. So that dwindling is highlighted in the third level. But in the fourth one, we have samyak drishti. Samyak drishti is there, enlightened worldview. It is non-restrained. Therefore, there is no proper regulation. Then, when there is partial self-restraint, it belongs to the fifth category. Then, careless self-restraint, then free self-restraint, then unprecedented volition, apurva karana, then uniformly mild volition, and if subtle passions are still there within, that is sukshma sampraya, then we have with suppressed passions. All these are discussed in the Yoga Shastra also, that these klesha, the kleshas are also found in the human beings in different proportion. So we have somewhere that is absolutely udara, we say, that means manifested. Somewhere it is totally suppressed. So all these are there in the context of the klesha. They have discussed this one. Then when these passions and attraction for the world life is removed, that is eliminated passions, kshina, mohaniya kashaya. So this kashaya is removed. Kashaya means that impurity is removed. And here onwards, you find a glorious spiritual life. Sayogi Kevali, dynamic and omniscient state, Jivan Mukta Avastha, according to the Vedantin. Then Videha Avastha, Ayogi Kevali, liberated and pure. What is that purity? That purity is nothing but the removal of all kinds of lingering, delusion, doubt, impurities, passions. All these are removed. So they don't belong to the soul. And that particular soul devoid of all these is pure soul, and that is liberated soul. So ultimately, according to the Jainism also, removing all impurities and allowing the self in its pure form is liberation. According to Sankhya Yoga, Nyaya Vaiśeṣika, as Jayanta Bhatta says in the introduction to his text Nyaya Manjari, and Vedanta also, ultimately the soul is pure, pristine, and removal of all these is what everybody is supposed to do. This is the stages of consciousness we find in the Jaina thought. Very important contribution to Indian philosophy is in the form of Sankhya, because Sankhya is the oldest philosophy which is found in the Shvetashvatara Upanishad also, though yoga is also found in Shvetashvatara in Kathopanishad, but we find that the yoga is not mentioned or given there as a developed philosophy. it is presented there as a means of self-control, that much only. Other things related to yoga philosophy are not properly discussed in the ancient Upanishads. Later Upanishads, of course, deal with that. So when we come to the Sankhya, it is the most ancient system of philosophy, and popularly believed to be the main opponent of Shankaracharya also, because Shankaracharya aimed all his guns at Sankhya system, they say. And yoga system is a sisterly one which follows Sankhya in many matters. Now when we come to the Sankhya, that is popular Ishwara Krishna. Later, Kapila Maharshi Sankhya Sutra are also there, but Sankhya Sutras are believed to be a later composition. Therefore, we don't get into the details of these texts. But whatever Sankhya philosophy is found in the Sankhya Karika, if we try to study these texts for the input on consciousness, we find that according to the Sankhya Darshana, the entire gamut of human cognition can be presented in the form of Vyakta, Avyakta, Vijnana. Vyakta, Vyakta, Jna. Three are there. Vyakta, Avyakta, Jna. The manifested world, but beyond that there is some unmanifested world. These two are matter. So matter has two phases: matter in manifested form, matter in unmanifested form. This is one category. This is known as Drishya, Jada, Prakriti. This is one. Now, is it everything? To the Charvaka, this is everything. To the Charvaka, the Prakriti itself is everything. Though there is no space, Akasha, all the other are there, and Prakriti can be taken as the final reality according to the Charvaka. But Sankhya system says that you are forgetting the subject, you are forgetting the perceiver, you are forgetting the entity involved in the process of cognition, that is Purusha. So two are there, Prakriti, Purusha. Prakriti in both the stages, that means manifested, unmanifested, it is matter only. Now, if this is matter, if this is something to be perceived, then there is some perceiver. It is consciousness. So this is Sankhya understanding. According to the Sankhya system, consciousness is called Purusha in Sanskrit. And they have their own logic. How can you say that there is something called consciousness other than matter? Because matter, according to Charvaka. But Sankhya Darshana is proposing another entity as consciousness. Then automatically that will lead to a kind of argument that if matter is everything, and if all cognitions, perceptions can be included and accorded in the matter itself, then what is the need of accepting an entity called consciousness? Then the Sankhya Karika also presented that the characteristics are different. The matter possesses some features which are not found in consciousness. So therefore, they wanted to discriminate between the two, that on account of these properties, this can be called matter, this can be called consciousness, and they have included so many things in matter only, like our mind, ego, our senses, all the physical elements, including our intellect. Everything they have included in the category called matter, and they kept consciousness independent. And according to them, the consciousness is participating in the process of creation, but it is not active. Very typical. So you find here matter is active, but it doesn't have any knowledge. Consciousness is not active, but it is participating in the process of creation. So therefore, if you believe in the process of creation, the Sankhya Darshana says that it is because of the participation of consciousness with matter. So the two should come together. Prakriti Purusha Samyogaha Tat Krita Sargaha. So this is the shloka in Ishvara Krishna Sankhya Karika, which says that it is the participation of consciousness with the matter that the world is created. So how does it participate? This was a big question. Though the ancient texts like Sankhya Karika, Sankhya Sutra did not throw much light on this particular very subtle aspect of Sankhya philosophy, later thinkers like Vachaspati Mishra, Vijnana Bhikshu, they had discussed it very thoroughly, and they said this participation is very important. That how does consciousness participate in the process of creation? Because it is not active. When it is devoid of any activity, how can it participate? Then Vijnana Bhikshu explains in his Yoga Vartika text that the consciousness participates in the process of creation by its mere existence. Its existence is enough. Then the problem arises if consciousness can participate in the process of creation by its mere existence, then consciousness being existent always, the srushti should be eternal like the consciousness, because there will always be participation. For that, the Sankhya thinkers have presented an answer saying that once the distinction or discrimination is taking place, then the consciousness and matter do not come together. Ishwara Krishna also presents towards the end of his chapter, the text on Sankhya, he says that once its purpose is served, the matter does not attach itself to the consciousness. So therefore, creation, bondage, knowledge, liberation, all these are the prerogative of matter, not of the consciousness. Consciousness is not doing anything, not participating in all these except in creation. So therefore, whether it is bondage or liberation, it has got nothing to do with the consciousness. Very typical one. Then, okay, if it is not consciousness, then who is in bondage and who is trying to get out of the bondage and who is actually getting liberation? The Sankhya Karika says, see, once you get the thorough discriminative knowledge, automatically the matter opens up its rare faculty called intellect, and that intellect opens up itself fully. Naham name iti kevalam utpadyate jnanam. So at that moment, there is no limited psychological feeling like I am here, this is mine. All these petty feelings, they get evaporated, and the matter in the form of the intellect that actually puts consciousness in bondage, apparent bondage, and it only withdraws, and that itself is liberation to the consciousness. So therefore, consciousness is not making any effort for liberation. So no Jīva, no liberation, nothing at all. But this is till one gets the discriminative knowledge. Till that, there is bondage, there is liberation for the common man. So this is Sankhya understanding. And when you ask the Yoga Darshana, the Yoga Darshana says that, see, it is consciousness as Purusha, we also agree. Matter does everything, we agree. And when matter modifies itself in the form of intellect, mind, senses, then because of his proximity, that means consciousness being in the proximity of the matter, there is a kind of reflection. The Yoga Darshana says that consciousness and matter, they are like the magnet and the iron dust, or you can say the crystal and some colorful object placed near it. See, with these examples, they try to explain the relation between matter and consciousness. They want to say that you place something, a colorful object, something near a crystal. The crystal reflects reflects everything, whatever is placed near it, reflects. But it doesn't catch anything. It doesn't modify into something. The moment you remove the colorful object, then the crystal remains in its pure form. On this particular analogy, the Yoga Darshana says that the consciousness is always pure. As Vyasabhashya says, Chit Shakti aparinamini darshita vishaya shuddha cha ananta cheti. So it is aparinamini, that means it is unmodified. Consciousness never modifies into something. It doesn't catch anything. It doesn't retain anything. It doesn't give anything. It is in its own form. That is consciousness according to Yoga Darshana. Then what happens? Shuddhacha. It is always pure, pure. Anantacha, endless. And because of this, the consciousness will continue, eternal. It will never decay. And because of the proximity, as I told you, because of the proximity of the matter, the consciousness, like a crystal, reflects. Whatever is placed near, it reflects. And what is close to consciousness? They say mind, your emotions, your thoughts, your idiosyncrasies, your cognition, everything. Then the consciousness reflects, attaching itself, saying, I know this, I perceive, I respond, I am dullard. So all these are reflections in the consciousness, but as such, the consciousness is pure. So therefore, what do they say? Patanjali Maharshi also has given in the very beginning of his Yoga Sutra that drashtuhu swarupe avasthanam. That means the mind does everything. It presents a world also before the consciousness, and through the mind, the consciousness gets the reflection, and now everything goes on. But once the chitta vritti, that means the thought waves are stopped, then there is no reflection on the consciousness. The consciousness remains in its pure form. It is known as kaivalya. Tada drashtuhu swarupe avasthanam. This is the pure state of consciousness, which is unaffected by the matter, uninfluenced by the matter. It is pure. The purity of the self is nothing but absence of any impression, absence of any influence on the consciousness through mind. So the Yoga Sutra understood that ultimately consciousness is colored, apparent. Colored by what? By the matter outside. Inside also, like Sukha Dukkha. Then, if it is colored by everything, who actually presents everything to the consciousness? What makes the reflection take place? It is mind. So therefore, chitta vritti nirodha. Yoga Sutra says, ultimately, you know that some world is there and you want to accommodate yourself in the world, and you are definitely subjected to various kinds of experiences, and all waverings, all lingerings, all doubts, all knowledge, everything is within this. That is through mind only. So therefore, Patanjali Maharshi said, if I stop this, the function of mind, then there is no reflection in the consciousness, and it is absolute kaivalya, liberation, state of liberation. But towards that, we try to understand, okay, if consciousness is pure, why does it come in the contact of the matter? Whether matter does it or consciousness. Some people who do not properly know the discussions in systems of Indian philosophy, they feel that it is ultimately the consciousness. It bears everything. But Yoga Sutra says no, it is the action of mind only. The consciousness is pure, but because of avidya, avidya is ignorance, spiritual ignorance, spiritual blindness. Because of that, from vyuha, klesha, chitta, vritti, downward progress, downward, you cannot say progress, a downward fall is there. That there is birth, there is life, everything because of this. And when we take a body, chitta is there, chitta vrittis are there, that means mind and all mind functions. But behind all these functions, the motive is klesha. Klesha means the inner deep impressions in the form of afflictions. They are the klesha. Because they lead to further birth, they are known as klesha. And a person who channelizes the inner force through dharana, dhyana, samadhi. So this is the spiritual discipline. That first concentration of mind, then meditation, then complete absorption, then out of this samadhi, prajna is born. Prajna is a clear perception. Earlier it was unclear because of the contact of mind. Now this prajna is so clear that it can find out the difference between matter and consciousness, and it allows the consciousness to remain in its pure form. This is prajna. But when this prajna matures, it is ritambhara prajna. Ritambhara tatra prajna. The Yoga Sutra explains that it is ritambhara prajna. This prajna, in the lower level, this prajna is natural human talent. But at the higher level, it is high spiritual knowledge, realization, ritambhara, which actually perceives only the reality. It doesn't go after any attraction, allurement. And that ritambhara prajna will finally lead to kaivalya. But when the question arises, who ultimately gets this kaivalya? Who will reach the state of kaivalya? Who will be there in the state of kaivalya? Very typically, nobody is there. In kaivalya, no Jīva is there. No Jīva. Because all individual self is because of the mind. And when mind along with its functions is stopped, then there is no Jīva also. Then kaivalya takes place. This is the highest destination of consciousness according to the Yoga Shastra. Now, if you compare with the Sankhya Darshana, you find here, it's very clear that the Yoga Darshana has given a very thorough, you can say, exposition, thorough treatment to various other matters related to consciousness. Because somewhere in the Yoga Bhashya, Yoga Sutra 3rd Pada also, they have very succinctly discussed some matters related to consciousness and the matter. So matter and consciousness. So it's very, very, very subtle. What is drashta? What is drashta? What is drik? What is chaitanya? All these are discussed in the Yoga Shastra, and they relate to the various aspects of consciousness only, including the purpose of consciousness. So if you ask Patanjali Maharshi, what is the purpose of consciousness? He will first say, in the 2nd chapter, he says, Sadhana Pada, that Bhogapavargartham Drishyam. Ultimately, matter is for 2 purposes. One is enjoyment, 2 liberation. It all depends how you react to the external material world. If you are self-restrained, you go for liberation. If you are taken away, carried away, if you are influenced by the external matter, that will lead you to bondage. But who is in bondage? Then Yoga Darshana says, as a matter of fact, Chaitanya has no bondage, no liberation. So everything is a play of matter only. Matter gets into bondage. Matter gets out of bondage. So, including Kaivalya, everything is only for the Drushya. Darsha means matter. And in Yoga Tattva Vaisharadi, last shloka it says that Atratu Dvai Mukti hi Kathita. In Yoga Shastra, you find two dimensions of liberation. One is in relation with consciousness, other is in relation with matter. So when two things are connected, when you separate one, the other is automatically separated. That is Kaivalya according to the Yoga Darshana. So we find the difference between these two, that according to the Yoga Darshana, consciousness is without modification, while all matter, including mind, that undergoes some modification. Consciousness does not transform in anything. Mind transforms. Consciousness is pure, mind is impure. Consciousness is eternal, mind is not. Consciousness is self, mind is non-self. So therefore, when Descartes says mind is consciousness, mind is self, we can understand that the yoga philosophy of Patanjali Maharshi, that is very clear, according to which mind is not self, mind is only an instrument to the self, through which the self gets into contact with the matter. And through meditation, the self is separated from the matter. That itself is samadhi, kaivalya, everything. And in the fourth section of Yoga Sutra, we find a sutra that sada jnatas chitta vrittihi sada jnatas chitta vrittayastad prabhov purushasya aparinamitvat. It says that there is some entity beyond and above the thought streams. So mind is something that is being observed, and the observer is consciousness. So therefore, it is in accordance with the theory of Sankhya that consciousness is drashta, but not karta. Very typical analysis. Then we come to the Nyaya Vaiśeṣika system of philosophy, according to which, see, why it is called Nyaya Vaiśeṣika, we know that once it was only Vaiśeṣika, then Nyaya system also evolved. But towards the 12th, 13th century, both the systems merged into one. That is Nyaya Vaiśeṣika philosophy. Most of the theories they share, they are common. So consciousness is also common to both, not much difference. Therefore, we understand as one single system. Self-consciousness, Atma, they say that Sukha, Dukkha, Dharma, Dharma, Jnanani, Manaso, Lingam. Similarly, Atmano Lingam is there. So desire, aversion, effort, pleasure, pain, knowing, these are the factors on the basis of which you infer the presence of some consciousness. Wherever these are there, there is consciousness. Thus, self-consciousness is something inferred from these only. And now you come to another important point, that consciousness is everything, or is consciousness present in something else? According to the Nyaya Vaiśeṣika, consciousness is inherent in the soul, Atma. Therefore, if consciousness is taken in the sense of buddhi, jnana, knowledge, cognition, then it is a property of the soul. Some 14 such properties are there in the soul. One is buddhi. As sound inheres in space, so just like sound is found in the space, consciousness is found in the Atma. Now you find a distinction between the two. Atma is the substratum, consciousness is the property. Soul can exist without the manifestation of consciousness. Like deep sleep. They say There is Atma, but there is no consciousness. So therefore, there is clear distinction between these two. Consciousness only appears when Atma is in a special relationship with something. So it is an appearance, a manifestation. Now, when it comes to mind, intellect, understanding, perception, sense, conscience, and will, these belong to the mind. Desire, aversion, effort, they belong to the soul. So they are different. But when you come to the categorization of consciousness, you find, according to the Nyaya Vaiśeṣika, that there is another higher consciousness called God consciousness. And this God consciousness is known from various sources, including the scripture, and the Nyaya Darshana also says that Jnanadhikaranam Atma. Atma is the locus of all cognition, they say, consciousness. Then they say Nitya Jnanadhikaranam Paramatma. Thus, they make a distinction between Ishvara and Jīva. They say Jīva, he possesses jnana. Ishvara also possesses jnana. But the difference is that the Jiva's jnana is limited, non-eternal. Ishvara's jnana is unlimited and eternal. So this is the difference between the two kinds of consciousness that the Nyaya Vaiśeṣika system says. Then when it comes to the final goal of consciousness, like liberation, the Nyaya Darshana, and on the same lines, the Vaiśeṣika Darshana also believe that ultimately it is the mkhya jnana that pulls the self down to the earthly attractions, and tattva jnana, that means realization, that will pull this out of this clutches of Prakriti. So tattva jnana is required, and tattva jnana means realization, knowing something very clearly without any doubt. But what to be known? The object of knowledge is variously presented in all the systems. According to Nyaya Vaiśeṣika, the world, Ishvara, Jīva, all these need to be known thoroughly. That is the means to liberation, they say. So thus, consciousness and matter, like our Sankhya Darshana, we have two, consciousness, matter. But further, in the same consciousness, another categorization is done, like Yoga Darshana. So in Nyaya Vaiśeṣika, we find single consciousness, that is God energy, plural, multi-consciousness, self. Jīva are many according to Vaiśeṣika and according to Sankhya also. As such, according to all the systems, excluding only Shankaracharya, you find the self is many. That means the plurality of self is accepted in all the systems, excepting our Shankaracharya. God energy is there, that is the super consciousness, but it is one. And plurality is very clear, matter of experience to all, that is the Prakriti. Now, coming to the Mīmamsa, we say that there is self, okay, Mīmamsa Shastra accepts in the presence of one eternal Atma. It is pure consciousness, continuous principle, pure consciousness. But it is self-subsisting. And it is Swayam Prakasha. It doesn't depend on any other for its manifestation. And the self remains the self as consciousness unmodified through all the different states of pleasure and pain. So they believe that whatever may be your experience, but the self is unaffected. It remains in its pure form. So that is the major theory of this system, which is accepted in toto in the Vedanta system also. So that is about the consciousness. A dynamic principle incessantly changing with the change of states, yet maintaining its identity intact through all its diverse stages of transition. So they say it is a dynamic principle. Through all the changing stages, it will be there. That's why it is dynamic. And it neither totally disappears Buddhists say like that. It is unmodified as the Naiyayikas believe. So some of these theories are common in all the systems, but they maintain their own distinction in the analysis of the particular concept. So when we study the Mīmamsa Sutra, behind all this discussion we find the core philosophy of Mīmamsa is that they believe on the Veda. The Vedas are the ultimate authority, and Vedas bear the purport, the sentential essence in the form of Vedic rituals. They believe that Vedas' final purport is in Vedic rituals only. That's what the Mīmamsakas say. When Vedic rituals are to be performed, who is the performer? Why should he perform? What will he get? All these are there. Then Mīmamsa Shastra says, it is, of course, the Atma for which the Vedic rituals are performed, and Atma is something that continues even after death. So one body is dropped, but Atma continues, and that Atma is the doer, performer of the various deeds, and it will get the result of the deeds also. And therefore, even after death, whatever the person must have done throughout his life, that he will carry. If he has done Vedic sacrifices, rituals, etc., then the result will be carried even after death, and as a result of that, he will get Swarga, etc. That is the Mīmamsakas find a necessity in accepting the presence of something called self as consciousness. Then they say cognition is momentary, and it is for one moment only. Therefore, it does not last up to the moment of another. So therefore, it is like the Buddhist Vijnanavada, that it arises and subsides, arises and subsides. Jaimini, of course, defines perception as a cognition, which is originated by sense-object contact. So when there is sense-object contact, the cognition is created, it originates, and it lasts for one moment. This is what Jaimini also says. Certainly, origination does not fit well with its eternity. So when cognition is created, it should not be definitely self, because self is eternal. So therefore, both are different. That is their idea. Moreover, if cognition is one simple entity, sixfold classification of pramana will have no meaning. This is another, that if jnana is one, how can you differentiate that this is perception, this is inferential knowledge, this is analogy, this is verbal testimony? So how can you differentiate only on the basis of the result? And result is cognition only. So therefore, the cognition should also be different, that there is one argument. Thus, the Mīmamsakas argue, and they say the soul is infinite substance, which is related to a real body in a real world, and it survives death to be able to reap the consequences. So, soul is there, Atma. After death also it will continue, and it will get the fruit of its deeds. But consciousness is not the essence of the soul. What is that? It is an adventitious quality, like some aharya guna, agantuka guna. In the Nyaya also we have such properties. So Mīmamsa also says, when some conditions are favorable, consciousness is created. Therefore, it is the quality of the self, like the Nayayika, not the essence. Self-consciousness does not always accompany the consciousness of an object, but it only occasionally takes place. So there are two differences, two aspects. Like one, you have consciousness in relation with the object. Two, consciousness without any relative aspect. So unrelated, pure consciousness, and related. In regarding the related consciousness, they say it originates and disappears, but there is another which is different from the consciousness of objects, and it continues. But when we come to the Vedanta, we have so many great thinkers like Shankaracharya, Ramanujacharya. According to Shankaracharya, consciousness is one. And he refutes all the standpoints of other systems, saying that you don't have any evidence in believing that all this is real. It is only conditional. It is only due to the various adjuncts that you see multiplicity, but there is only one which is eternal. And due to avidya, it comes into contact with the matter and it doesn't have any bondage or liberation. Thus, each soul is essentially divine. Then how can you say each soul and divine? He says each soul essentially divine, and when a person reaches that stage, he knows that there is no multiplicity at all. It is only due to adjuncts. So that realization itself is liberation. Thus we have the world as illusion, the Brahma as the source of everything. Individual soul, he is in between these two. He has to detach himself from the world and attach with the supreme consciousness. Thus it is within. It's not something related to time and space. It is within. Everybody can get that kind of realization of consciousness as one. So therefore, consciousness is related to name and form. But name and form, these two are illusory. Consciousness is absolute reality. Now, when you say illusory, what do you mean? Whatever is negated by second knowledge, whatever is discarded, like dream experience discarded after coming into the wakeful state. So when we wake up, we remember, oh, I saw so many dreams. Now it is only a dream. Those objects, individuals, everything, all experiences are all not real, only illusion. Similarly, when a person wakes up into the eternal consciousness, then name and form, they merge into that, they disappear, that is mithya. So individual consciousness, supreme consciousness, but through meditation, a person can take himself from individual to supreme consciousness, that is Vedanta. For that, Vedanta takes help of two principal sentences of Upanishad. One is instruction, Tattvamasi, you are that. When a student approaches a teacher seeking spiritual knowledge, the teacher says according to Advaita, you are that art thou. But what is that other? You find in the picture below that a boy is looking into the mirror, looking at his own reflection and feeling thrilled. Similarly here, the world, the individual soul, everything is only a reflection of the universal consciousness. And when a person is properly trained in spiritual matters, he will get the experience as Aham Brahmasmi. I am the eternal Brahma. Now, Nimbarkacharya, another great thinker, he slightly deviates and says, you cannot take any one theory final. The consciousness is there as Ishvara consciousness. You are Jīva, always different. You are plural. You are distinct. You are different. Ishvara is different. So two consciousness are there in Nimbarka system. Madhvacharya also believes that consciousness is not single. It is different. So the difference is accepted. According to Vallabhacharya, though it is Advaita, here you find that there is a kind of relation between individual and supreme consciousness. Therefore, it is Advaita in disguise. So, in all these systems, we find that ultimately it is the consciousness that is the player and the thing played. Both are there. And as I told you, we all are interested in that what actually causes all these experiences and what is the ultimate goal of this consciousness, whether it is one or many, whether it is in bondage or not. So all these are there. They are properly discussed in our systems of philosophy. And here I stop my lecture. Thank you all. If you have anything to discuss, we will discuss.
Thank you, Professor. We'll go ahead and take some questions now. I request Ms. Aditi to please moderate this Q&A session.
Thank you, Vidya. Namo Namah Acharya. Thank you for such a wonderful lecture. And now the floor is open for question and answer. You can either raise your hand and ask the question, or you can type your question in the chat box.
Yeah,
Yes, Priya. Go ahead, you can ask your question.
Good evening, sir.
Good evening, ma'am.
Thank you for the talk. It was great. My question is then in Advaita Vedant, what is it that is exactly in bondage? Is it the ego, the aham vritti, or is it the consciousness?
Yeah, according to the Antahkaranavachina Chaitanyam Jivaha, and that Antahkaranavachina Chaitanya has no bondage. But Antahkarana Avachina is there, no? That particular adjunct, Antahkarana, it is in bondage. So they say consciousness is never in bondage. Na baddho na cha sadhakah ityesha paramarthata. Gaudapadacharya also says in the Mandukya Karika. So it is very clear that only Antahkarana is in bondage. Buddhi, Ahankara, Chitta. Sankhya Darshana also says the same thing.
Okay, thank you, sir.
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, Ms. Kanika, you can go ahead and ask.
Thank you, Penna sir, for such an enlightening, comprehensive talk on this
Yeah.
subject matter.
Thank you, ma'am.
I'm not from Goa University. I'm actually a researcher from Delhi University, and I'm just about to submit my doctoral thesis. The I had from you was very, it's slightly technical, but it was also for my own clarification purpose. I hope I'm able to ask it properly.
Okay, ma'am. Yeah.
The question is that I'm doing my thesis on Sankhya Yoga and Patanjali Yoga Sutra and Taittiriya Upanishad, and I'm trying to address the philosophy of yoga and meditation. So I have done some decent work regarding Upanishadic Upanishadic philosophy and Yoga Sutra philosophy. What I'm trying to understand is that when you say in Sankhya, in the school of Sankhya philosophical system, Purush Prakriti are dual in the manner of matter and consciousness. My question is that in the Sankhya Karika, verse 62, it is clearly stated that Prakriti itself is the reason of our bondage and of our liberation.
Yes.
So in that manner, dualism exists, but only on the face of it, like superficially. In a manner that Prakriti, when it realizes through Kaivalya that it is having the discriminative knowledge and it moves beyond the duality, then it is able to achieve liberation from that duality. So herein the consciousness or the role of consciousness is of self-realization. I mean, in that manner, if one understands.
Yeah, I got your point, ma'am. See, Badhyate Muchyate cha Nanashreya Prakritihi is the Karika you are referring to. Yes, Sankhya Darshana clearly said that Prakriti, it itself puts itself into bondage and pulls it out, etc. That is true. So therefore, in Sankhya Darshana, consciousness as such doesn't have any bondage, no liberation. It is pure and eternal.
Correct.
But because of aviveka, avidya, it appears as if it has got into the bondage. Yes, correct.
True. That was just one of the clarification. Otherwise, I think it's a very enlightening lecture because there are so many aspects of consciousness. Even in the last couple of years, I've been studying so much, but the way you have put it, I think it is remarkable. You have comprehensively said everything possible from Indian philosophical perspective about consciousness. I'm really grateful and thankful to you for putting it so succinctly into one lecture. For some professors, it's impossible to put whole, their lifetime, and you've done it so wonderfully well, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thanks a lot, ma'am. Yeah, even if there is one student or one researcher, one scholar, and so really the speaker feels so elated that it is for that soul, because when Upanishads are given, we have 134 crore people, and we are sure that all the people do not read Upanishads, do not understand, live a common life, but there will be one person who gets really enlightened by the teaching of Upanishads. Similarly, what I feel is, if one person is really happy because of the lecture or gets some input, gets inspired, then I feel that the purpose of arranging such a lecture is fulfilled. Yeah,
Indeed, sir. Indeed. That is
true.
very true.
Yeah,
Thank you so much.
thank you so much, really.
Any other questions? We will put Professor Penna's email in the chat box as well. So if you have any further questions or any discussions that you want, you can reach out to him.
Yeah.
Okay, if there are no further questions, I think the Q&A session ends here. Back to you, Vidya.
Thank you, Professor, and thank you, Aditi. May I now request
Thank you,
Mr.
Nidhi.
Akash to kindly propose the vote of thanks.
Yes, thank you, Vidya. A very heartfelt thanks to Dr. Madhusudan Penna for the very wonderful talk. As mentioned by the research scholar, it was truly wonderful to have so much of research, so much of so many different concepts in one talk itself, and covering all of entirety of Indian philosophy and its view towards consciousness in one lecture itself. I give my heartfelt thanks to Dr. Madhusudan Penna. I also thank Dr. Koshi Tarakan, the Dean of School of Sanskrit Philosophy Indic Studies, for his amazing support to all the research scholars for in organizing a monthly talk. Monthly talk every every month, and I also thank all the research scholars of the department who were part of the event in organizing in different ways, also in helping making the poster and all the other work. I also thank all the faculty members present from the university as well as all other colleges, and I also thank all the attendees and the students. Thank you so much for attending the talk, and I give back to Vidya.
Thank you, Akash. We have come to the end of this event. The recording of this lecture will be uploaded soon on our school's YouTube channel, Philosophy at Goa University. We'll be back next month with another online guest lecture. Once again, thank you all so much for joining us today. Namaste and have a wonderful day.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for obliging me.
Thank you, ma'am.
I'm Aditi, if you can see me.